Yesterday I did my first video blog entry, and today I am going to read a little bit from A Christmas Carol because, as I explained yesterday, I'm convinced that in my past life as Mathew Franklin Whittier, I was the original co-author of that work along with Matthew's beloved wife Abby. So what I've done is to deconstruct or reconstruct rather what I believe the first two paragraphs were in Matthew's original. And I think Matthew would have written this part. Abby comes in where the ghosts come in because she wrote the ghosts. But Matthew wrote Scrooge and Marley and so on. So the way I determined this was I got into the online copy of Dickens' handwritten draft. What I think he would have done was to take Matthew and Abby's copy, their manuscript, copy it over, throw Matthew and Abby's original into the fire, and then he would have started working on it from his own copy. And the one that we now have access to, I'm guessing, is at least the second draft, possibly the third. There's various reasons that my reasoning in that is in my books. But I was able to get into the first couple paragraphs and reconstruct what Matthew's original prose was. So I'm going to start with those two paragraphs, and then I'll go to my 1844 volume. This is A Christmas Carol. It's been rebound back in the old days because it's got this marbleized cover. But this is probably what Matthew would have seen, what he would have bought when it came out, when it got to America. Probably wouldn't have gotten to America right away in the Christmas season. So I'll pick back up with that. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and his mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Alas, I don't mean to say that I know myself what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I should have been inclined, myself, to consider a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Now we pick up with the 1844 edition. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, then there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night, in an easterly wind, upon his own ramparts, than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. So there, that's a little something for posterity maybe, if anybody ever takes me seriously. The article after the next one is going to be about Edgar Allan Poe and the Raven, and I will be reading some of the Raven from my original copy of that work, the one that Matthew published in American Review, not the one that Edgar Allan Poe falsely claimed in his own newspaper, the one he was working for. These things, by the way, are obvious. I keep trying to get it through to people. Once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. Once you see it, it's obvious. Charles Dickens could not possibly have written this book. And then if you read, as I have, over 2,300 of Matthew's published works, you see his voice. I mean, the puns in here are his puns. You know what I'm saying? This is Matthew. Well, all right. So anyway, that's a little something, and hopefully this will work out. You can see that the video resolution is much better in this one. I think I've got all the technical problems fixed. What I found when I used to be in video production was, I mean, I was so pressed for time being a one-man band with that company that if I could get something to work and figure out a routine that will work every time, I just did it, whether I understood. In other words, I never went in and took 6 weeks to learn a whole program or a whole piece of equipment because I didn't have that kind of time. So what I would do would figure out a procedure that worked, and then I would stick with it and do everything exactly the same, and it always worked, you know, and then I could move on to the next 20 things that I had to deal with. So I've got that habit now. So I think I now have a system that works, specs that work, and I'll just stick with it, and hopefully we'll be able to do this. How often I'll do these blogs depends very much on whether people like them and how many people watch them. So I would urge you to please bring these to your friends' attention and share them, and you know, subscribe and all the things that people on YouTube always ask you to do. Not because I want to monetize it. I'm not sure even if I got to that point that I would do that. I might if I really needed the cash, but I really dislike most of the ads that come on. So unless I, you know, could control what ads came on, I really wouldn't want to do that. But I want to get this out. This message has to get out to enough people, and they have to see it enough times because it's so outrageous that people, if they see it just once, they're just going to dismiss it, and it just bounce off. And it's just been bouncing off. No matter who I write to or what I say in my blog, you know, it just bounces off. So this is my latest effort to do some video blogs in support of the article that I'm putting on Real Paranormal Magazine. That then, after a suitable delay, will go into academia.edu, where it's keyword searchable by academics. So that's the plan. I do the blog, the video blog, that gets more popular, that promotes the Real Paranormal Magazine article that comes out quarterly. That then goes into academia.edu, and the word gets out to the professors. So that's the plan. We'll see if it works, and I'll see you next blog video.